I thought it would be a routine job, the kind you finish, invoice, and forget. One isolated estate, one elderly client, one long day. I didn't know the house was waiting for me, or that by agreeing to step inside, I'd already crossed a line I couldn't walk back from. I'd taken the job because I needed the money. Simple as that. Independent work dries up fast when you're picky, and I wasn't in a position to be. The call came late in the afternoon, the voice on the other end calm, refined, and painfully polite. An old estate outside town needed a security upgrade after a recent incident. No details, just urgency. When I arrived, the property looked less like a home and more like something preserved for display. Tall brick walls, narrow windows, and a symmetry that felt too intentional. The owner, Mrs. Aldwin, greeted me from the doorway, bent with age but sharp-eyed. Her clothes were old-fashioned, meticulously clean, and her jewelry looked heavier than it needed to be. She spoke as if she were granting me an audience, not hiring me. I told myself I'd dealt with eccentric clients before. Wealth does strange things to people. Still, as I stepped inside, I felt like I was being evaluated, not welcomed. The caretaker introduced himself as Mr. Holloway, and if Mrs. Aldwin felt severe, he felt exhausted. Not physically, but in a deeper way. Like someone who'd been holding the same breath for decades. He shook my hand too firmly, smiled too quickly, and kept glancing back toward the house, as if afraid it might hear him. While I walked the property, taking notes and measurements, he followed a few steps behind, answering questions carefully, never offering more than necessary. The estate was filled with antiques that hadn't been moved in years. Rugs worn thin by the same paths, furniture positioned to hide rather than decorate. I noticed doors that were sealed shut, their frames painted over again and again. When I mentioned them, Mr. Holloway gently changed the subject. Mrs. Aldwin, however, corrected him when he spoke out of turn. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The control she carried was absolute, and it hung in the air heavier than the dust. The real moment that stuck with me came when we discussed the layout for the system. Most of it was straightforward windows, exterior doors, motion sensors. But then Mrs. Aldwin asked about securing the access point beneath the house. She said it casually, like she was asking about a closet. I hadn't even noticed it yet. When I asked for clarification, Mr. Holloway stiffened, his face tightening just enough for me to catch it. He said the space wasn't used and didn't need attention. Mrs. Aldwin overruled him instantly. She insisted it be included, insisted on reinforced locks and additional sensors. The urgency in her voice cracked through her polished tone for just a second. I agreed, already calculating the added cost. As we wrapped up, Mr. Holloway walked me out, thanking me too many times, his hand lingering on mine when we shook. "Some places," he said quietly, "aren't meant to be improved, just contained." I laughed it off as I left, but the words followed me all the way home. I came back the next morning with my cousin Liam riding shotgun. He needed the cash, and I needed an extra set of hands, simple arrangement. Liam cracked jokes as we drove, but the humor faded the moment the estate came into view. The house looked different in daylight, not friendlier, just more exposed. Every line felt intentional, every angle deliberate. Inside, while Liam unpacked equipment, I walked him through the layout. That's when we both started noticing things that didn't add up. Windows on the outside didn't match the rooms they should have belonged to. A hallway near the east wing ended in a blank wall, but from the exterior there should have been space beyond it. I brushed it off at first. Old houses get remodeled. walls get moved, but the inconsistencies kept stacking up. Liam pointed out that the ceilings varied by inches between rooms on the same floor. Not enough to notice unless you were looking, but once you did, you couldn't unsee it. The house didn't feel broken. It felt edited. As I continued the walkthrough, my attention kept drifting to the walls. Portraits lined the halls, dozens of them, all in similar frames, all depicting members of the same family. At least, I assumed they were family. Different eras, different clothing, but the same sharp eyes, the same narrow mouths. Some paintings were clearly centuries old, others almost modern, yet they were arranged without any sense of chronology. It felt less like decoration and more like documentation. Liam joked that it looked like a haunted ancestry website, but his voice dropped as he said it. One portrait near the staircase caught my eye, a woman who looked almost identical to Mrs. Aldwin, just younger. The plaque beneath it bore a different name. When I asked Mr. Holloway about it, he smiled thinly and said the family valued tradition. No further explanation. Mrs. Aldwin watched us from across the room, her gaze never blinking, like she was making sure we saw exactly what she wanted us to see. When we reached the ground-level access door, the atmosphere shifted. It was tucked behind a decorative hedge, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Heavy metal, reinforced hinges, and a lock system that belonged on a vault, not a residential crawl access. I commented on it out of habit, mentioning the kind of alarms I'd recommend. Mrs. Aldwin interrupted before I finished the sentence. She didn't just want alarms, she wanted redundancies. Motion sensors, contact sensors, internal triggers. Her voice was steady, but there was something tight underneath it, something urgent. This wasn't about theft. This was about making sure the door never opened unnoticed. Mr. Holloway stood a few steps back, wringing his hands, his eyes fixed on the ground. When I asked if the space was used for storage, he hesitated just long enough to answer no. The silence that followed was louder than any alarm I could have installed. As we wrapped up measurements, Liam pulled me aside and asked if the place gave me the creeps or if it was just him. I told him old houses always feel strange, that history leaves fingerprints. Even as I said it, I didn't believe it. Mrs. Aldwin insisted on reviewing the access door specs again before we left, her fingers tapping her cane faster each time I confirmed the security level. She looked relieved when I promised it would be sealed tight. Mr. Holloway didn't share that relief. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time he looked at me with something close to pity. As we loaded the truck, I caught him staring at the house, his lips moving as if in prayer. I should have listened to that unease. Instead, I told myself it was just another eccentric client and another strange job. I didn't realize yet that the house wasn't watching us leave. It was watching us plan our return. I brought it up as professionally as I could, like it was no big deal. Running wires beneath the house would keep everything hidden, cleaner, more reliable. Old estates hate exposed cables, and I learned the hard way that wealthy clients care more about aesthetics than function. Mr. Holloway didn't answer right away. He stood there blinking as if I'd asked him to unlock a vault instead of a crawl space. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. He said it wasn't necessary, that the space beneath the house was unstable, unused, better left alone. I told him I'd worked in dozens of crawl spaces worse than whatever this place had to offer. He shook his head just once, subtle but firm. The conversation felt wrong, like I'd stumbled into a boundary I wasn't supposed to see. Then, Mrs. Aldwin cleared her throat from behind us, and everything changed. She didn't ask questions. She didn't debate. She simply said yes. Access would be granted. Her approval came too quickly, like she'd already made the decision long before I asked. Mr. Holloway turned to her, startled, and for a brief moment I saw something raw in his expression: fear, not disagreement. He opened his mouth as if to object, then stopped himself. Mrs. Aldwin's cane tapped sharply against the floor, ending the discussion. She instructed him to unlock the door when I was ready and told me to be efficient. That was it. No explanation, no warning. As she turned and walked away, I noticed her grip tighten around the cane, her knuckles pale. Whatever was beneath the house, she wanted it secured, not examined. That should have been my cue to push back. Instead, I told myself approval was approval and a job was a job. The access door was worse, up close, thick metal industrial hinges and a locking mechanism you'd expect on a storm shelter or a panic room. Definitely not standard. Mr. Holloway unlocked it slowly, his hands trembling just enough for the keys to jingle. When the door swung open, the air didn't rush out the way it should have. There was no breeze, no temperature shift, just stillness. Absolute, suffocating stillness. I crouched and shined my flashlight inside. The beam cut through a narrow stretch of dirt and stone, revealing nothing that immediately explained the precautions. No pipes rattling, no scurrying animals, no signs of life at all. That alone was wrong. Crawl spaces are never empty. They hum, they breathe, they crawl. This one felt sealed off from the world entirely. Then the smell hit me, damp rot layered with something colder, like stone that had never seen daylight. It wasn't strong, but it lingered in the back of my throat. I hesitated longer than I cared to admit. Every instinct I had told me to stop, to seal the door, and walk away with some excuse about structural issues or liability. But instinct doesn't pay invoices, and fear is easy to rationalize when nothing has gone wrong yet. I suited up, clipped my flashlight to my chest, and lowered myself inside. The dirt was packed hard beneath my hands, colder than the air above. As soon as my body crossed the threshold, the door closed behind me with a dull, heavy sound. I paused, listening. No movement, no echo, just my own breathing, loud and intrusive. The smell intensified the farther I crawled, clinging to me like a warning I was choosing to ignore. I told myself I'd be in and out in minutes. I told myself it was just an old house with old secrets. I was wrong on both counts. I settled into the work, letting muscle memory take over while Liam moved room to room above me, feeding wires down through drilled channels. We kept up a light back and forth at first, joking through the floor, the sound of his footsteps grounding me. Then his voice shifted. It dropped, tightened. I heard Mrs. Aldwin speaking to him, her tone soft but probing, each question delivered like it mattered more than the last. She asked about his work history, why he needed the money, what he planned to do with his life. When he answered vaguely, she pressed harder. I could hear the cane tapping as she paced. Then she asked about his past mistakes, the kind you don't put on resumes. Liam laughed it off, but the laughter didn't last. She asked if he thought people like him were useful. The word hit harder than a shout. I stopped crawling and listened, my chest tight, my hands frozen in the dirt. The next sound shattered everything. A gunshot, deafening, final, followed by a heavy impact that rattled dust from the beams above me. Liam didn't scream. That's what haunts me the most. Just a sharp, involuntary gasp. Then nothing. I yelled his name, scrambling forward, slamming my shoulder into the underside of the floor, shouting until my throat burned. I could hear movement above me, footsteps retreating, the slow, deliberate tap of a cane moving away. Panic flooded in, thick and paralyzing. I turned and crawled toward the access door, my flashlight bouncing wildly as I moved. I was almost there when the light vanished. The door slammed shut with a metallic crash, followed immediately by the unmistakable slide of reinforced locks engaging. I threw myself against it, screaming, pounding, my fists raw in seconds. The door didn't move. It didn't even tremble. I don't know how long I stayed there, gasping in the dark, before I heard footsteps outside. Mr. Holloway's voice came through the metal, muffled but clear enough to recognize. He apologized, not defensively, not hurriedly. He sounded genuinely sorry, like someone offering condolences at a funeral. He said it had to be done, that he'd hoped it wouldn't come to this. I demanded he let me out, begged him to call for help, threatened him with every consequence I could think of. He listened quietly, then said he truly believed Mrs. Aldwin wanted the security system. That part broke something in me. This wasn't panic. This wasn't a crime of impulse. This was maintenance, routine. When he stepped away, I heard him lock something else, another barrier, another layer of separation between me and the world above. I slid down into the dirt, my back against the door, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. The pieces began to line up whether I wanted them to or not. The reinforced locks, the insistence on alarms, the hesitation, the fear, the approval that came too easily. Liam hadn't been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Neither had I. We were exactly where they wanted us. I realized then that the house wasn't reacting to our presence. It had been prepared for it. Whatever lived beneath that estate, whatever Mrs. Aldwin was protecting or feeding or containing, it had requirements. And someone had decided that today, those requirements would be met. I didn't stay by the door long. Grief and fear don't sit still. They push you forward or tear you apart. I forced myself to move, crawling away from the faint outline of the sealed entrance and deeper into the crawl space. The flashlight beam swept across dirt and stone that looked older than the house above, the foundation giving way to something rougher, more deliberate. The space widened in places, narrowed in others, as if it had been shaped by intention rather than erosion. The further I went, the stronger the smell became. It wasn't just rot anymore. It carried a metallic edge, thick and wet, clinging to the back of my tongue. I started hearing things, too soft sounds that didn't belong to any animal I knew. Whispers maybe, or breathing. I told myself it was my imagination reacting to shock, but the echoes didn't fade when I stopped moving. They waited. The crawl space ended beneath what I recognized as the main living area of the house. I could tell by the pattern of footsteps above me, slower now, heavier. I followed the sound until the ground dipped unexpectedly, revealing a wide, uneven pit hidden beneath a wooden panel reinforced from above. The panel shifted slightly as something moved on the other side, letting a blade of light spill down into the darkness. I crept closer and aimed my flashlight downward. The drop was deeper than I expected, the walls slick with age and moisture. Then something moved at the edge of the beam, not fast, deliberate. I caught a glimpse of limbs that bent the wrong way, joints flexing with unsettling ease. Pale skin stretched tight over muscle, reflecting the light like damp stone. Whatever it was, it noticed me. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, purposeful. That's when I saw Liam, or what was left of him. He was being dragged across the floor above the pit, his body limp, his blood trailing behind him in a dark, uneven line. I shouted his name without thinking, the sound tearing out of my chest. The movement paused. For a second, I thought I'd been heard, that someone might answer. Instead, the thing below let out a low, wet sound, something like satisfaction. Liam's body slid forward, disappearing over the edge of the opening. I lunged, slamming my hands against the stone as I watched him vanish into the darkness. The sound of his body hitting below was followed by a chorus of whispers that swelled into something almost joyful. I wanted to throw up. I wanted to die. Instead, I stayed where I was, shaking, staring into the hole like it was staring back. I don't remember deciding to follow in. I just remember standing at the edge, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it might tear free. Every rational thought screamed at me to stop, to hide, to survive. But guilt is louder than fear when it's fresh. I couldn't leave him there. I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen. I lowered myself over the edge, my boots scraping against stone as I searched for footing. The whispers quieted as I descended, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. When I dropped the last few feet and landed hard, pain shot up my legs, but I stayed upright. The air down there was colder, denser, pressing against my skin. I aimed the flashlight forward and stepped into the tunnel ahead, following the blood trail deeper into the earth. Whatever waited for me, I knew one thing with terrifying clarity. The house above was only the entrance. The real horror lived below. The tunnel opened into something vast, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. This wasn't a natural cave or a forgotten basement. It was an underground complex carved and expanded with precision over generations. Stone walls rose high above me, smoothed by tools rather than time, their surfaces etched with shallow grooves and markings that felt purposeful even if I couldn't read them. The air was colder here, unnaturally so, and utterly still. My flashlight revealed branching corridors stretching in multiple directions, each one reinforced, maintained. This place hadn't been abandoned. It had been cared for. As I stepped forward, my foot brushed against something brittle. I looked down and felt my stomach twist. Bones. Not scattered, not discarded, but arranged neatly along the walls. Skulls stacked in patterns. Long bones aligned like supports. It wasn't chaotic slaughter, it was ceremony. Whoever built this place believed in order, even in death. As I moved deeper, I realized the chambers weren't random. Each section felt distinct, separated not by walls but by subtle changes in construction and design. One chamber held smaller bones, another larger, heavier remains. Symbols repeated within each space, consistent but different from neighboring sections. It dawned on me that these weren't religious catacombs or mass graves. They were familial, bloodlines preserved in stone, generations catalogued beneath the earth. I saw no crosses, no prayers, no signs of worship as I understood it. This wasn't about faith, it was about lineage and continuity, about keeping track. The thought made my skin crawl. The whispers I'd heard earlier returned, clearer now, layered voices murmuring in a language that felt old and intimate, like a family argument carried on forever. I realized I wasn't meant to hear them yet. I was being allowed to. That's when I saw them. Fugger stepped out from the darkness at the edge of my light, moving with a smooth, deliberate confidence. They were humanoid in shape, but wrong in every other way. Pale skins stretched tight over powerful frames, veins faintly visible beneath the surface. Their eyes were missing no sockets, no scars, just smooth flesh where sight should have been. And yet they turned their heads toward me in perfect unison. They didn't shamble or hiss. They stood still, listening, evaluating, their mouths parted slightly, revealing teeth. Too uniform, too sharp. These weren't corpses reanimated by myth. They were living predators, adapted to darkness and patience. I felt like prey that had wandered into a den unnoticed and was now being politely acknowledged. More of them emerged, forming a loose semicircle that blocked the corridors behind me. None of them touched me. None of them rushed. That restraint terrified me more than violence would have. One stepped closer. close enough that I could feel the cold radiating off its skin. It tilted its head, as if studying my face, then let out a low sound that rippled through the chamber. The others echoed it softly. Recognition. I didn't know how, but I understood what it meant. They weren't reacting to me as an individual. They were reacting to where I'd come from, to the house above, to the name Aldwin. I realized then that Mrs. Aldwin hadn't been guarding a secret. She had been maintaining a responsibility. And by stepping into this place, I hadn't just trespassed. I'd been identified. They parted without a word, opening a path deeper into the complex. I didn't want to follow, but my body moved anyway. Legs stiff, breath shallow, every step echoing louder than it should have. The chamber we entered was larger than the others, its ceiling lost in darkness, the walls polished smooth by time and touch. At its center stood a figure that didn't move when I approached, not because it couldn't, but because it didn't need to. It was taller than the others, broader, its pale skin etched with faint lines that looked less like wrinkles and more like cracks in stone. I couldn't see its eyes, but I felt its attention settle on me with crushing weight. When it spoke, the sound didn't echo. It sank straight into my chest. It called itself the First Hair, not a name but a title, and it said this land had always belonged to its kind. It told me the house above was never meant to be a home. It was infrastructure, a system, built and rebuilt over generations to attract the right people, filter them, and funnel them downward. Wealth, tradition, and isolation weren't indulgences, they were tools. The estate ensured privacy, loyalty, and silence. Mrs. Aldwin and Mr. Holloway, it explained, were not masters of this place. They were stewards chosen because their families understood obligation. They lived long lives in comfort in exchange for maintaining order and supply. When I demanded to know what that meant, the creature didn't answer directly. It didn't have to. The bones lining the walls filled in the gaps. The First Hair explained that caretakers always believed they were in control, right up until they weren't. Authority was a story told to keep them compliant. I asked why the creatures didn't just leave, why they needed a house, a family, a ritual. The First Ear tilted its head, almost amused. It said they were bound, not trapped, but anchored. The land fed them, sustained them, shaped them. Leaving it entirely came at a cost they were unwilling to pay. Not yet. They could venture out briefly under strict conditions, but they needed intermediaries to manage the surface world, to select, to prepare, to clean up. Over time, caretakers aged, weakened, questioned. Some tried to run. Others tried to expose the truth. When that happened, replacements were required. Fresh hands, fresh loyalty. The system adapted. It always had. I realized then that Liam hadn't been killed out of cruelty. He'd been evaluated and discarded. I was still under consideration. The First Hair stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the cold stone scent clinging to it. It told me I had been seen doing what caretakers were supposed to do, entering the dark, following orders, continuing forward despite fear. That counted for something. I was offered a choice, framed gently, almost kindly. I could return to the surface and take their place, ensure the house remained functional, the lineage intact, the colony fed. In return, I would live comfortably, safely. Or I could refuse and join the others lining the walls, my usefulness ending the moment I stopped being convenient. The chamber fell silent as it waited. Dozens of unseen faces turned toward me, patient and confident. They had time. I realized, standing there beneath the estate, that this was the true purpose of the house, not to hide monsters from the world, but to teach people how to serve them willingly. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch, let them believe I was breaking under the weight of it. When I finally nodded, it wasn't because I accepted their terms, it was because I understood them. Live or be consumed. Serve or disappear. I told the first hair I would do what was required. The tension in the chamber eased immediately, like a decision had been logged and approved. They didn't celebrate. They didn't celebrate. They simply stepped aside and allowed me to leave, confident in their leverage. That confidence was my only advantage. They believed fear had already finished the job. As I climbed back toward the crawl space, I replayed every inch of the estate in my mind, every tool I'd brought, every chemical in the maintenance shed, every wire I'd already threaded through the house. If I was going to die, I wasn't going to do it quietly in the dark. I moved fast once I reached the upper crawl space, working through pain and shock with a clarity I'd never felt before. I stripped wires, rerouted lines, and pulled what I needed into one place. I found fuel containers stored for landscaping equipment, solvents meant for cleaning stone, anything that would burn hot and fast. I didn't need an explosion yet. I needed attention. Smoke would do that. I built a small fire beneath a ventilation gap and fed it slowly, letting it crawl instead of roar. The smell rose fast, thick and unmistakable. I heard movement above me within minutes, shouted questions, hurried steps. I stayed low, waiting, my heart hammering as the smoke did its work. Fear travels faster than reason. I knew they'd come down to stop it. They always did. Caretakers protected the house before anything else. The access door opened with a rush of fresh air and panic. Mr. Holloway came through first, coughing, one hand over his mouth, the other gripping a blade I hadn't seen before. He froze when he saw me, eyes wide with something like regret. He told me it didn't have to end this way, that he'd tried to make it painless. I didn't give him time to finish. When he lunged, instinct took over. We crashed into the dirt, grappling like animals. The blade found my side. Pain flared white hot, but adrenaline drowned it out. I drove my tool into his throat, felt the resistance give way, felt his body go slack beneath me. He died staring at the ceiling, lips moving like he was still apologizing. I didn't stay to listen. I took his keys, his weapon, and what little time he'd left me. Mrs. Aldwin was waiting inside the house, standing at the top of the stairs as if she'd known exactly how it would end. The revolver in her hand didn't shake. Her expression didn't change when she saw the blood on me. She told me I was making a terrible mistake, that the system had kept things balanced for generations. I told her balance didn't include my cousin bleeding out in the dark. She fired. The shot went wide, shattering a frame on the wall. I closed the distance before she could fire again. We struggled briefly, her strength surprising, her grip desperate, but age and certainty aren't the same thing. I dragged her toward the hidden entrance, her cane clattering uselessly behind her. As the floor panel opened and the cold air rushed up, she finally screamed, not in fear, but in anger. I didn't answer. I pushed her forward and watched her disappear into the depths she'd spent her life protecting. I didn't follow her all the way down. I didn't need to. The sound told me everything. The long fall, the impact, the sudden chorus rising from below. The creatures surged toward her with a hunger they'd barely bothered to hide before. I watched from the edge as pale shapes closed in, their movements efficient, practiced. This was familiar to them, ritualized. They fed exactly as promised, just as they always had. For a moment I stood there shaking, soaked in smoke and blood, wondering if this was the part where I was supposed to feel relief. I didn't. I felt empty. And then I remembered the fuel I'd dragged down with me, the wiring I'd stripped, the containers stacked just out of sight. The first here's confidence echoed in my head, that certainty that nothing ever changed. That was the mistake. While they were distracted, I poured everything I had into the chamber fuel, soaking stone, wood, bone. I struck the lighter with hands that barely felt like mine and tossed it in. The fire bloomed fast, greedy and violent. The reaction was immediate. Screeches filled the tunnels, sharp and furious, cutting through the roar of flame. Shapes lunged toward me, but the fire spread faster than they could move, racing along the channels they'd carved themselves. Smoke thickened, heat building until the air burned my lungs with every breath. I turned and ran, stumbling through corridors that twisted and narrowed, the ground trembling beneath my feet. Behind me, something massive shifted, stone cracking under pressure it hadn't felt in centuries. The system was failing. Above me, I could hear the house responding, wood popping, glass shattering, the deep groan of a structure finally giving up its secrets. I reached the crawlspace as flames began licking up through the pit, forcing the creatures back into the dark they'd ruled for so long. I hauled myself upward, skin screaming, vision blurring, and burst out into the open air just as part of the floor collapsed inward. The estate was already burning. Fire tore through the lower levels, climbing walls and consuming everything Mrs. Aldwin had spent her life preserving. Thick, black smoke rolled into the night sky, carrying with it a stench I knew would never fully fade. I staggered away from the house, barely aware of the blood soaking my clothes, or the way my chest burned with each breath. The ground beneath the estate shuddered again, then sank, pulling part of the structure down into itself as the tunnels collapsed. It felt less like destruction and more like burial. I fell to my knees at the edge of the property, watching flames claw at the dark, knowing I didn't have the strength to run any farther. In the distance, sirens wailed. First one, then several growing louder as they cut through the countryside toward the inferno. By the time the emergency lights washed over the ruins, the house was no longer a house. Just a blazing scar in the land, collapsing inward as firefighters moved in with practiced urgency. I stayed hidden among the trees, forcing myself to breathe, to stay upright, to remain unseen. No one looked for me. No one noticed the man limping away from the glow, swallowed by the darkness beyond the property line. As the night closed in and the sirens blended into a distant roar, I realized the fire hadn't destroyed the horror beneath that place. It had only scattered it. Whatever survived would remember, and somewhere deep beneath the ground, something old was learning how to live without a house. I watched from the edge of the woods as emergency crews swarmed the ruins. Fire engines lined the drive, lights painting the trees in violent reds and blues. Men shouted orders, hoses screamed, water hissed against flame. From a distance, it looked controlled, contained, like a problem being solved. I told myself that meant it was over. The house was gone. The tunnels had collapsed. Whatever lived beneath that estate had burned with it. I repeated that thought until it almost sounded true. My body shook uncontrollably, the adrenaline finally bleeding out of me, leaving only exhaustion and pain behind. I sank against a tree and slid down into the leaves, staring through the branches as the roof caved in on itself, in a shower of sparks. I thought about Liam and forced myself not to picture his face. I thought about Mrs. Aldwin and her certainty, about Mr. Holloway's apologies. For the first time since I'd gone under that house, the night felt quiet, too quiet. That's when I noticed movement beyond the firelight. At first I thought it was firefighters repositioning, shadows stretched and distorted by smoke. Then I saw the way they moved low, deliberate, keeping to the dark. Figures slipped between the trees on the far side of the property, their pale forms barely visible against the trunks. No urgency, no panic, just migration. My stomach dropped as understanding hit me all at once. The house hadn't been their cage, it had been their anchor, their feeding ground, their buffer from the rest of the world. They hadn't been trapped below because they couldn't leave. They'd stayed because it was easier to be fed than to hunt. Now the system was gone. The firelight caught one of them just long enough for me to see its head turn, smooth and eyeless, angling toward the chaos like it was listening. Then it disappeared into the trees, followed by another and another. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, as more shapes emerged, dozens of them spreading out, melting into the night in different directions. No one saw them. No one was looking for them. The emergency crews were focused on flames and falling beams, not the tree line beyond the property. I finally understood what the first hire had meant when it said they were bound to the land, not imprisoned by it. The estate had been containment, a controlled environment, a way to keep their hunger managed and hidden. By destroying it, I hadn't freed the world from them. I'd removed the only structure that kept them predictable. Somewhere out there, they were already learning new paths, new patterns, new ways to feed without caretakers to slow them down or clean up after them. I didn't wait for dawn. I left while the sirens still wailed and the fire still burned, limping through fields and tree lines until the glow faded behind me. Every shadow felt like it was watching. Every sound made my heart stutter. I knew I couldn't tell anyone what I'd seen. No one would believe it, and even if they did, there was nothing they could do. The world above was loud, crowded, full of people who never thought about what lived beneath their feet. That ignorance had been a shield, and now it was a weakness. As the first light of morning crept over the horizon, I realized the truth I'd been trying to avoid. The horror hadn't died in that fire. It had adapted, and somewhere out there, unmonitored and uncontained, it was finally free to spread.